Sexuality is not that
Yeah.
I'm talking about. Sexuality is very spiritual in nature, and that's a God-given gift too.
I saw him in a discotheque one night, and I grabbed him by his shirt and I said, "Better come on, get this hit."
The truth about Prince's secret gay relationships has finally been revealed. For decades, the music legend hid passionate affairs with men that would have destroyed his career if exposed. From his childhood friend, André Cymone, who broke his heart.
I looked down the row and I saw this kid and I thought, let me go stand next to this kid. He looks interesting. So I went up and I said, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Andre." And he said, "I'm Prince." I said, "Prince?" He said, "Yeah." I said,
To his obsession with Michael Jackson that consumed him for years.
There was never like any rivalry between you and Mr. Jackson?
Oh, not to me, no.
Okay.
Prince's forbidden loves shaped everything about his music. These are the secret relationships that taught Prince why fame makes authentic love impossible. So, let's get into it. From his earliest performances, Prince defied every single one of those expectations, creating an artistic persona that would make him one of the most sexually ambiguous figures in music history.
What's the matter? You got another man? Is he fine? Tell me, darling, is a man having like mine?
The speculation intensified as Prince began forming close relationships with male musicians in his orbit. These were intense, emotional connections that would blur the lines between friendship and something deeper. As his career progressed, these relationships would become the source of both his greatest creative inspirations and his most painful personal disappointments. The first man to break Prince's heart was also his oldest friend, Andre Anderson, who would later become known as André Cymone, had been Prince's childhood companion since they were teenagers growing up in Minneapolis. Their relationship would evolve from friendship to musical partnership to something much more complicated, a romantic entanglement that would set the pattern for all of Prince's future relationships with men. Andre and Prince met in high school when both were outcasts, biracial kids in predominantly white Minneapolis who found solace in music and each other's company. They spent countless hours together, writing songs, practicing instruments, and developing the sound that would eventually make Prince famous. But their connection went far deeper than musical collaboration.
I looked down the row and I saw this kid and I thought, let me go stand next to this kid. He looks interesting. So I went up and I said, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Andre." And he said, "I'm Prince." I said, "Prince?" He said, "Yeah." I said,
Friends from that era remember the two as inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and sharing an intimacy that made others uncomfortable. They wore matching clothes, styled their hair similarly, and developed what observers described as their own private language of looks and gestures. When Prince formed his first band, Grand Central, Andre was automatically included as the bassist, not just because of his musical ability, but because Prince couldn't imagine making music without him. The intensity of their relationship became apparent during the recording of Prince's debut album, For You, in 1978. Studio engineers reported that the two would arrive together, leave together, and spend breaks huddled in private conversation. Andre was the only person Prince trusted with complete creative input, and their musical chemistry was undeniable.
his first album, I was right there. Second album, I was right there. We lived together. The third album, I engineered probably a good bit of it, the Dirty Mind album. He didn't want people to think somehow I was, you know, the brains behind his whole thing.
As Prince's star ascended, the foundation of his relationship with Andre fundamentally transformed. What had once been a partnership between equals became an employer-employee dynamic, with Andre relegated to a supporting role in Prince's expanding musical empire. This professional hierarchy inevitably created tension, as their childhood friendship from high school struggled to survive the new power imbalance. The shift from creative collaborators to boss and sidemen introduced complications that their personal bond couldn't easily withstand. fundamentally altering the nature of their connection. The breaking point came during the recording of Dirty Mind in 1980. André had been developing his own artistic vision, writing songs that showcased his individual style rather than simply supporting Prince's vision. When he approached Prince about featuring some of his compositions on the album, he was met with cold rejection. Prince had become protective of his creative control and wasn't interested in sharing spotlight with anyone, even his closest friend. Industry insiders reported that the conversation between Prince and André became heated, with André accusing Prince of using their personal relationship to keep him creatively subservient. André's departure from Prince's band in 1981 was emotionally devastating for both men. Rather than a simple professional separation, it felt like a divorce.
Prince changed management. They didn't want me to wear clear pants anymore. They didn't really want me to be as out front anymore.
The aftermath of André's departure affected Prince deeply. He became more guarded about mixing personal relationships with professional ones, and more suspicious of people's motives for getting close to him. Friends noticed that he stopped trusting male musicians the way he had trusted André, always maintaining emotional distance even during intimate collaborations. André went on to have a successful solo career, but he and Prince never fully reconciled. They would cross paths at industry events, sharing awkward conversations that hinted at unresolved feelings. André's marriage to a woman in the late 1980s was seen by some as his attempt to put distance between himself and rumors about his relationship with Prince. For Prince, the loss of André became a template for future disappointments with men. He had learned that mixing love with music was dangerous, that the people closest to him could hurt him most deeply, and that vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford if he wanted to maintain control over his career and his heart. The relationship between Prince and Michael Jackson represents one of the most complex dynamics in music history, a rivalry so intense and personal that insiders believed it masked deeper feelings that neither man could openly acknowledge. What the public saw as competitive tension was actually the manifestation of Prince's unrequited fascination with the only artist who could match his talent and commercial success.
There was never like any rivalry between you and Mr. Jackson?
Not to me, no.
The two superstars were inevitable comparisons from the moment Prince emerged in the late 1970s. Both were young, black, extraordinarily talented, and sexually ambiguous in ways that made mainstream America uncomfortable. But while Michael Jackson achieved massive crossover success by softening his edges, Prince doubled down on his provocative image, creating a dynamic where they represented opposite approaches to black male artistry. Behind the scenes, Prince's feelings about Michael were far more complicated than simple professional rivalry. Industry insiders reported that Prince was obsessed with Michael's career moves, studying his albums, analyzing his performances, and constantly measuring his own success against Michael's achievements. But the obsession felt personal rather than purely professional. The famous incident at James Brown's concert in 1983 became legendary, but the full story reveals deeper complexities. When James Brown called both artists on stage, Michael performed confidently, while Prince seemed uncomfortable and quickly left. What wasn't widely reported was that Prince had spent considerable time preparing for the possibility of sharing a stage with Michael, rehearsing potential dance moves and song choices as if this was the most important performance of his life.
You know, I'm a musician. I live for that.
Sources close to Prince revealed that he had attempted to reach out to Michael personally on multiple occasions throughout the 1980s, suggesting private meetings or collaborations that never materialized. These weren't typical industry networking attempts. They were described as emotionally charged overtures that Michael's team consistently declined, often without explanation. The most telling incident occurred in 1987, when Michael's team allegedly reached out to Prince's management about a potential duet for the Bad album. Prince was reportedly excited about the possibility, seeing it as an opportunity to finally connect with Michael on an artistic and personal level. However, when the collaboration details were discussed, Prince became upset about what he perceived as unequal treatment in the arrangement and withdrew from the project. Prince's songs from this period contain numerous references that fans interpreted as being directed at Michael Jackson. Tracks like "Wouldn't You Love to Love Me" and certain verses in Purple Rain included lyrics that seemed to address an unattainable love object who was in the public eye. The ambiguity was intentional, but those close to Prince understood the subtext. The dynamic became even more complex as both artists' careers evolved through the 1990s. While Michael faced increasing scrutiny about his personal life and relationships, Prince maintained his mystique but seemed to track Michael's troubles with particular interest. Sources reported that Prince would become agitated when discussing Michael's legal issues or health problems, displaying a protective concern that seemed inconsistent with their supposed rivalry. Industry veterans who knew both men suggested that Michael was aware of Prince's feelings, but chose not to engage with them directly. Michael's own struggles with sexuality and identity made him reluctant to explore any connection that might complicate his already precarious public image. The tragedy of their relationship was that both men were isolated by their fame and might have found genuine connection with each other if circumstances had been different. Instead, they remained distant figures orbiting each other's careers, close enough to feel the attraction, but never close enough to act on it. Prince's obsession with Michael Jackson taught him that wanting someone who couldn't or wouldn't love him back was a form of emotional self-destruction. It also reinforced his belief that fame made authentic romantic connection nearly impossible, especially between men who were constantly under public scrutiny. The music industry of the 1980s was a testosterone-fueled battleground where male artists competed not just for chart positions, but for dominance in the cultural conversation. For Prince, two of his most intense rivalries, with Rick James and Morris Day, contained undercurrents of sexual tension that transformed professional competition into something much more personal and confusing. Rick James represented everything Prince both admired and resented about funk music. James was older, more established, and unapologetically sexual in ways that made Prince's androgynous mystique seem calculated by comparison. But their rivalry became intensely personal when it began revolving around women, specifically Vanity, the lead singer of Prince's protege group, Vanity 6. The conflict between Prince and Rick James over Vanity was legendary in music industry circles, but insiders suggested the real tension wasn't just about the woman they were both pursuing. It was about two extremely alpha males recognizing something in each other that they couldn't openly acknowledge. Their public feuds had an intensity that seemed to mask attraction rather than pure animosity. Rick James was known for his hypersexuality and openness about his appetites, while Prince maintained his enigmatic image. But people who witnessed them together described interactions that seemed more like a mating dance than genuine conflict. They would stand closer than necessary during conversations, interrupt each other constantly, and engage in verbal sparring that observers found uncomfortable to watch. The situation became more complex when Rick James allegedly made private overtures to Prince that went beyond professional collaboration. Sources suggested that James, who was known for his adventurous sexual appetite, had propositioned Prince during a late-night studio session in 1983. Prince's rejection of this advance reportedly led to increased hostility between them, but also seemed to intensify their mutual fascination. Morris Day presented a different type of challenge for Prince. As the frontman of the time, Morris was Prince's creation, a performer he had discovered, developed, and positioned as his onstage foil. But their relationship quickly evolved beyond mentor and protege into something that resembled a romantic dynamic played out in public.
You know, he gives me a hug, he says, "I love you." And that caught me off guard because that was the first time he ever said that in all the years I've known him. And I was like, I love you too, man.
Their staged rivalry during concerts was carefully choreographed, but the sexual energy was real. They would engage in mock confrontations that included intimate physical contact, mirror poses, and synchronized movements that suggested deeper connection than simple showmanship. Audience members often commented that watching Prince and Morris perform together felt voyeuristic, as if they were witnessing something private made public. Behind the scenes, their relationship was equally complicated. Morris would later describe feeling controlled and manipulated by Prince, but also admitted to being obsessed with earning Prince's approval and attention. Their interactions included late-night phone calls, private meetings, and emotional confrontations that other band members found disturbing. The dynamic reached a breaking point during the Purple Rain era when Morris began asserting more independence and creative control. Prince's reaction was possessive and jealous in ways that went beyond typical professional concern. He would show up unexpectedly at Morris's solo recording sessions and became agitated when Morris collaborated with other artists. Both rivalries taught Prince painful lessons about the intersection of competition, attraction, and power in his relationships with men. With Rick James, he learned that sexual tension could be disguised as professional conflict, making it impossible to address directly. With Morris Day, he discovered that creating someone in his own image could lead to a form of narcissistic attraction that was ultimately destructive.
I'm sitting there, I'm like, you know, something's different here.
These experiences reinforced Prince's growing belief that his feelings for men were dangerous and needed to be carefully controlled. The intensity of his connections with Rick and Morris showed him that he was capable of deep attraction to male artists, but also that acting on these feelings could destroy both his career and his artistic relationships. As Prince entered the 2000s, his approach to relationships with men had evolved from passionate intensity to cautious spirituality. The wild rivalries and hidden attractions of the 1980s and 1990s had given way to a more mature understanding of his own needs, but also a wariness that would shape his final romantic disappointments with male partners. Larry Graham, the legendary bassist from Sly and the Family Stone, entered Prince's life during a period of spiritual searching that followed his conversion to becoming a Jehovah's Witness.
Larry and I have been, he's been so kind as to help me with a lot of things that I didn't quite have a firm grip on. There's a lot of temptation out in the world, and
What began as religious mentorship quickly developed into the most emotionally intimate relationship Prince had experienced with a man since his early days with André Cymone. Graham was older, established, and represented the kind of musical legacy that Prince deeply respected. But their connection went beyond mutual admiration for each other's artistry. Prince became devoted to Graham in ways that concerned his inner circle, seeking his approval not just for musical decisions, but for personal choices about his lifestyle, relationships, and spiritual practices. Their relationship intensified as Prince struggled with his identity as a Jehovah's Witness while maintaining his sexually provocative artistic persona. Graham became both spiritual advisor and emotional anchor, helping Prince navigate the contradictions between his faith and his artistic legacy. But the intimacy of their connection created tensions that neither man seemed prepared to address directly. The devotion became obsessive. Prince would rearrange his schedule to accommodate Graham's availability, seek his input on everything from song arrangements to wardrobe choices, and become visibly distressed when Graham was unavailable for extended periods. Friends observed that Prince seemed to need Graham's presence in ways that resembled romantic dependency more than spiritual guidance.
So we have a very close relationship. We spend a lot of time digging deep into the truth and deep into gaining more knowledge and drawing closer to our Creator, and that's very, very important.
George Clinton represented a different type of connection for Prince, a shared queerness in visual style and stage persona that allowed for artistic intimacy without explicit romantic tension. Clinton was a pioneer of funk's theatrical androgyny, and his acceptance of Prince's gender fluidity provided validation that Prince had rarely experienced from male peers. Their collaborations were marked by creative chemistry and mutual respect, but also an undercurrent of attraction that both men acknowledged through their art rather than personal interaction. Clinton's influence helped Prince embrace more fluid expressions of masculinity in his later career, but their relationship remained safely within artistic boundaries. Billy Preston represented Prince's final significant connection with a male artist before his death in 2016. Preston, who had been openly gay later in his life and had worked with legendary artists including the Beatles, crossed paths with Prince during studio sessions in the early 2010s. Their brief interaction was reportedly intense and emotionally significant for Prince. Sources suggested that Preston's openness about his sexuality and his successful career despite industry homophobia gave Prince hope that authentic expression might be possible. Their conversations allegedly included discussions about the challenges of maintaining artistic integrity while navigating industry expectations about masculinity and sexual identity. But Preston's death in 2006 ended their connection before it could develop into something deeper, leaving Prince with another loss that reinforced his belief that meaningful relationships with men were destined to cause him pain. By the end of his life, Prince had learned to protect himself from the emotional vulnerability that had characterized his earlier relationships with men. The spiritual seeking of his later years provided a framework for intimate male friendships without the sexual complexity that had complicated his younger experiences. These final relationships confirmed Prince's understanding that his attraction to men was real and profound, but also that acting on these feelings within the constraints of his public image and spiritual beliefs was ultimately destructive. He chose artistic legacy over personal fulfillment, creativity over romantic authenticity. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.